Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Averna. In this class, we'll take a look at the Jewish concept of Mashiach, Messiah. We'll spend time looking at many sources, including the writings of a rabbi from the 12th century, Moshe ben Maimon, who wrote the first great compendium of all Jewish laws called the Mishneh Torah, and Maimonides gave a detailed description of the Messiah here based on a comprehensive compilation of Torah and the prophets and rabbinic teachings. And in another place, he wrote the 13 greatest principles of the Jewish faith. There, the 12th law states, quote, "I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, and even though he tarry, I will eagerly await his coming every day." I also think this quote on faith is applicable to the Messiah as the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. First of all, let me tell you a little about me. This is a picture of me without a beard and before I had my nose worked on. Full disclosure, I am not a rabbi, nor do I have any extensive theological training, but I have been a seeker and a questioner all my life, and my questions have brought me to this place that I have a desire and passion to share what I've learned from the books I've read and other sources that I've encountered over the years. The classes that we'll be taking a look at here in terms of the presentation, in this presentation we'll be doing the first class, and again, as I think I've mentioned before, these classes, some of them, the Noahide and this one and some others that will be coming up in the future, are classes that I have taught at a community college, and so I'm redoing them here in video format. So again, this first class we'll be dealing with as an introduction, and in class 1 I present a case for Israel being a unique source for the Messianic idea, and present a case for a belief in rabbinic teaching. I also present a key teaching of the great law codifier of the 13th century, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, or Rambam on the Messiah. In class 2 then, we'll take a look at who the Messiah is and isn't, what his mission is and isn't, and in this class we'll present a great deal of scripture backing up the ideas presented. In class 3 then, we'll take a look at what and why, what the signs of his coming are, why we need a Messiah, why can't the world heal itself, examples of end times that show we may not be very far off. And in class 4 we'll look at when. We'll get to what I think is the truly fun part, the controversy about discussing when and why so many believe we are now in the footsteps of the Messiah. And finally, in class 5, we'll talk about how any of this might even be possible. I have some ideas, and hopefully you do too. So we'll take a look at all of those things in the classes to come. Regarding questions, since this is a video, we can't deal with questions or comments in class, but I do encourage you to put these in the comment section and I or others can answer them. With regards to questions and comments, please note that this class is not a platform for me to ask or encourage you to exchange your beliefs for mine, but simply a presentation of what Judaism teaches with regards to the Messiah. And I hope the reverse of this is also true. Keep an open mind as we listen together. And the other thing I want to spend a little bit of time on are what I call just the facts, ma'am. As I said, my goal is to present facts, but as we know from the world we live in, facts and truth can be two different things. Facts can have an expiration date. Truth does not. At one time, a flat earth and the sun revolving around the earth were facts. Still, it's important for you to know what I consider facts, and if we disagree, I would just ask that you suspend your disbelief for a brief time to hear me out, and then you can decide. Now, the most important of these facts is that there is a higher power that has had a plan for his creation from the beginning. Another fact is that God has had a unique relationship with the history of a certain group of people known today as Jews. I will give a very brief history of that connection. And a third fact involves the unique position of prophets and teachers in Judaism to present communication from God to humanity. This Communication has been written down mostly in the books of the Torah and the prophets, but also includes the Talmud or oral law and from Torah scholars throughout the ages. And then I also want to discuss briefly the use of pronouns. So my use, at any rate, of pronouns. This higher power, who most of us call God, is not a man or a woman, but there are two different energies that have existed from the beginning. The male energy is that which gives, the female energy is that which receives, in a very simple explanation of a topic that's really very complex. But for our discussion, it will suffice. So within God and each of us are both forms of energies. But since the aspect of God that is giving us the hope for a Messiah and Messianic age, and the prophecies and commandments regarding his coming is dealing with the giving masculine energy, then I use the masculine pronouns. So I want to talk briefly about the bibliography for this class and several of these books that I'll be quoting from or taking information from to share with you. First of all, let's look at this one, Devar Malchus. This is written by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, dealing with Rambam, Maimonides' conception of the Mashiach. And again, very interesting look at Maimonides, which we'll be touching on briefly, but gives a lot more detail in this book. And then the next one, also by Schneerson, is Sound the Great Shofar, or at least it's essays on the imminence of the redemption, and it's adapted from talks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it's edited, authored by Eliyahu Tuger. So again, another one from the standpoint of the Lubavitcher Rebbe here. This book, Mashiach, Who, What, Why, How, Where, and When, as you may have noted, I actually kind of modeled the name of the class after this book. This is an excellent book just as a general overview of the Messiah, and it was written by Chaim Kramer, and it just fleshes out the person of who the Mashiach will be. So I recommend that book as a general overview. If you're just starting out with information, wanting information, that's a good place to begin. The next book, also by Schneerson, I Await His Coming Every Day. And these are 5 discourses of the Rebbe that illuminate the writings of Maimonides on the Messiah. Some overlap between these, but again, both very excellent books, again, from the standpoint of the Chabad Rebbe, Menachem Schneerson, and would recommend those if that's an area that you want to pursue some more information on. And then also this book here, Mashiach, The Principle of Mashiach in the Messianic Era in Jewish Law and Tradition. This will give a lot more information about Jewish writing, other Jewish sources dealing with Mashiach. It's by Jacob Shochet, and just deals with principles of Mashiach and the Messianic era in Jewish law. The Secret Doctrine of the Gaon of Vilna, we really aren't going to spend much time with this book. I just put it here because it's a fascinating read. It's difficult. It deals with very deep mystical elements of who the Messiah is and what the Messianic age is, what it's all about. And it also deals with a topic I'll mention, but we're not going to spend a lot of time with, and that is Mashiach ben Joseph. There is a concept in Judaism that there are 2 Messiahs, Mashiach ben Yosef, who will come just before Mashiach ben David. They both have different roles, but there's also it's not a complete. There's a possibility that in the prophecies that there are 2 messiahs, but there's also a possibility that those 2 messiahs are one. So again, it's this concept it's kind of interesting, but again, we won't be spending a lot of time on it here. And then finally, this book is just an overview. Let's get biblical. If you're familiar at all with Rabbi Tovia Singer, this is his book. It's subtitled Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah? This is in 2 volumes also. an excellent book if you really want to delve into all of the beliefs that Christianity has as to why Jesus is the Messiah, and the arguments that Judaism has as to why Jesus is not the Messiah. So again, even if you believe in Jesus, it's a good idea, I think, to look at this and see what is being said there. But anyway, that's that. We don't really quote a lot from that, but still, it's an excellent book. Rabbi Tovia Singer, Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah? And it is an exhaustive book, exhaustive in the sense that it just covers everything and illuminates many things regarding those aspects. There's another book that actually isn't pictured on here, but if you can get a hold of it, it's very fascinating. It's called 50 Jewish Messiahs, and I will be quoting some from this book. It's the untold life stories of 50 Jewish Messiahs since Jesus, and how they changed the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim worlds. It's by Jerry Rebau. And so again, an excellent book. You can probably just Google 50 Jewish Messiahs and get some more information about it. It's not a huge book, but it does have a lot of good information in it. And then, of course, the Talmud itself. Everyone here and in other places, I will also quote from the Talmud or sources related to it that deal with the discussion of the end times and the discussion of who the Messiah is and who the Messiah isn't. So let's touch on another quote-unquote fact for belief in the truth of Messiah, and that is its universality. A lot of times, we talk about the flood beliefs. We see that in almost every culture, every religion, there's a flood story. And that universality says somewhere along the line, something happened. And it's the same thing with the belief in a Messiah. There is, at a very core level of almost every religion, and maybe every religion, there is a core level belief that there is a person or an age that will happen that will bring peace to the world. And of course, it's a nice thing to believe, but also, again, looking at the fact that so many religions believe in that, it brings it to a place of saying, okay, there's something there. Using Wikipedia as our source to talk about each of these four areas, each of these four beliefs that I want to deal with specifically, we'll take a look at, first of all, Christianity. As most of you know, I think Christianity believes the Messiah has already come in the form of Jesus, fulfilling what they claim are many biblical prophecies, and we'll look at today. But he didn't fulfill all of them, so they have a second coming, a time that he'll return to finish the job. Excuse me. Islam also believes, interestingly enough, that Jesus will return as the Messiah. Many of you may not have realized that. I didn't realize it myself until I did this research. But they also believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that there's another person that will be kind of along with him. But at any rate, they believe in Jesus as the Messiah, and that Messiah will bring world peace and truth to the world. Of course, they believe it'll be Islam, and that he'll be preceded. We talked about the possibility of a Messiah ben Joseph preceding Jesus, and of course the prophecies talk about Elijah preceding Jesus. The Muslims believe that there's a figure called the Mahdi, and that he will fight and defeat Gog and Magog for the Messiah. Buddhism also has a belief in Maitreya. Maitreya is a bodhisattva who, in the Buddhist tradition, is to appear on earth to achieve complete enlightenment and teach the pure Dharma. So that is the Messiah for Buddhism. And there are some that in Buddhism, as I understand it, not everyone, but some who believe also that we are very close to those times happening. And then also in Hinduism. In Hinduism, it's thought that the Kalki will be the 10th and final incarnation of the avatar of the highest god Vishnu. Kalki will come at the end of the present age, known as the Kali Yuga, an age of darkness. Kalki will destroy all this darkness, annihilate ignorance, and bring again that golden age, that time of peace, of Satya Yuga, the Yuga of truth, when humanity is governed by the gods in the purest goodness, where righteousness will reign supreme again. A lot of this information from Wikipedia, but again, interesting. We can find in the four major religions of the world, every single one of them has a concept of a Messiah. Where did this concept come from initially? And that's kind of the point that we want to talk about here. So, why study the Jewish Messiah? Again, why not study the Christian Messiah or the Islamic Messiah or the Buddhist or Hindu Messiah? Why are we studying the Jewish Messiah? First and foremost, I believe, again, this is a fact for me, these teachings from Judaism are the foundations for both Islam and Christianity, certainly, and their concepts of the Messiah. But I believe there's an argument that can be made that, again, since it's older, the concept is older with Judaism, or Hebraism, as Rabbi Ben Moshe calls it, that there's an argument that can be made that even from the standpoint of Hinduism and Buddhism, their concept of the Messiah borrows heavily as well from Judaism. But primarily, I can definitely make the case for both Islam and Christianity. It's certainly possible that at some distant time, that concept, and I absolutely believe this is true, was known to all mankind. Every person, every religion, every belief at one point recognized that after the, again, however it's dealt with in each religion, but after the fall of Adam, or whatever fall took place, that there was then a promise of redemption from that fall, and that promise became the person, an idea of the Messiah. Judaism itself teaches that Adam was aware of the promise of a Messiah and passed that teaching on. So very briefly, let's look at some facts that would tend to demonstrate the unique place that Israel, okay, so if we're going to say that Israel is the author of all of this, then why would we believe Israel? Why would we care? And what I want to show is the unique place that Israel has had in history and in the world, which I think gives some very pertinent information that can lead us to understand the important place that Israel has in the scheme of God for the world. So again, why should we believe that anything Judaism has to say is relevant or important? So I want to look at some facts here. Christianity, 2.38 billion. These figures are probably low. They're about 3 or 4 months old when I did the research on this, but 2.3, so roughly 2 billion people are Christians in the world. Islam has almost 2 billion. That figure might actually be at 2 billion now. So these two huge, these make up the majority of people in the world, if you will, as far as the four great religions. Then the numbers would seem to indicate that, okay, these folks have it all, okay? 4 billion people, roughly 4 billion people. Okay, Judaism has never had much more than 17 million in the world, as far as census, as far as we know, as far as any census that's been taken. So both Christianity and Islam, and here's the point I want to make here, both have tried at one point or another in history to eliminate Judaism. Now, it just seems like eliminating 15 million people when you've got 2 billion should be a pretty easy task. But it didn't happen. Okay, it didn't happen. We're going to take a look at also not just Christianity and Islam, but all of the empires in the past that have also tried to eliminate Israel. So what does that mean? What does that say? Well, it says that there's something special going on here. There's not by their own power or their own ability. You know, if I were to say that Christianity with 2.38 billion people, if I were to say to you, okay, well that proves that they're special. They've got a lot of people. And yet, they've never faced the kinds of things that Judaism faced and survived. Okay, they've survived by their sheer bulk, perhaps, but not. We can't really look at that miraculously in the same way that we can look at Judaism. All right, so that's one of the main points that I want to make. But let's look also at, and this is in the past. Okay, we talked about Christianity today isn't necessarily trying to eliminate Judaism. Islam may be still trying to. And again, we're not speaking about all Muslims. We're talking about a few. But at the same time, at one point, it was something that was important to Islam is to eliminate Judaism, just as it was important to Christianity. So we say, all right, so that's the past. That's the past. And we're going to look more about the past in a minute. What about the present, or the relative present? We can look at Israel. Okay, the Independence War, 1948, when Israel first became a country, and almost immediately they were attacked by every nation around them. And there's no way that they should have survived. The 6-Day War, there were 50,000 in Israel, 50,000 Israelis at the time, and that was in June of 1967. And they fought against 560,000 from 6 different countries. They won, they lost. We can look at the Yom Kippur War in October of 73. 400,000 Israelis versus 1 million, again from 6 countries. They won, they lost. We've had all the wars since, and you can look at the headlines in the world today, and you can see that that it still happens, that Israel goes over and above every other logical possibility of surviving. Okay? There's no reason that they should have survived. They did. What this says to me is, again, making the assumption that there is a God, and that God has a plan, and that God also has made some choices in terms of who he's preserving for whatever reason. This pretty much speaks to that and has a great deal to say. So let's go even further back. Let's look now at the previous 2,000 years of history. So ancient empires, these empires ruled over Israel in one form or another, and also in one form or another they tried to eliminate Israel. So the Egyptian Empire probably goes first in its conquest. Of course, we have the Exodus, the attempted enslavement of Israel, the Exodus of Egypt, and the Exodus from Egypt into Israel. So the Egyptian Empire, as it was at this time, is gone. They no longer exist. Okay, Israel still exists. Next, we can look at the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire, they became the next empire that kind of took over in this area. They also attempted to eliminate Israel, and in fact, they did eliminate the northern tribes. Okay, and that was 900 to 600 before the Common Era. After the Assyrians came the Babylonians, the Babylonian Empire. Okay, they also attempted to destroy Israel. They did destroy the temple and the first temple, and took them out. Again, the Babylonians' empire is gone, no longer exists. Israel remains. The next empire to take a look at is the first Persian Empire, and there also we see their dominance. We see the story in the book of Esther of Haman trying to eliminate the Jews. In that case, most the ones that they were dealing with weren't directly in Israel at the time, but it was because of that attempt and other things that Israel was returned to its land by the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire is gone. They no longer exist. Israel remains. Next empire we can look at is the Macedonians. Alexander the Great comes to conquer, takes over all of this area. And at first they have a very good relationship with Israel. Of course, again, Alexander's empire was divided into among his 4 generals. One general took Egypt and became the Ptolemaic Empire. Another general took Assyria, essentially this area here, and became the Seleucid Empire, the Greek Empire. And at one point, the Hanukkah story deals with an attempt by one of the great leaders, one of the Antiochuses, Antiochus the Fourth, who tried to destroy Israel, or at least destroy the beliefs of Israel, of Judaism. He failed. The Greek Empire is gone. Israel remains. And of course, finally, we have the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire taking over all of this area, and they also ruled in Israel. They attempted to destroy Israel many times, destroying the temple in 70 of the Common Era. They tried, they failed, they no longer exist. The Roman Empire is gone. It has other forms that we can argue whether they still exist or not. And of course, there's the idea that all of this has to do with the struggle, mystically and perhaps physically, the struggle between Jacob and Esau. Esau, according to many Jewish traditions, became the Roman Empire, the brother of Jacob, and throughout history, Jacob and Esau have been struggling and fighting with one another. Again, sometimes Esau has the upper hand, sometimes Jacob does, but Jacob is still here. Israel is still here. Somehow, and this is the bottom line, somehow this small group of troublemakers has survived and thrived through 2,000 years of exile. It's interesting, the Dalai Lama, there's an interesting book called The Jew and the Lotus that chronicles this, but the Dalai Lama actually gathered several Jewish leaders to Dharamsala to speak to him, to hear about how they did it, how the Jews or Israelites survived in exile, because of course the Tibetan Buddhists are in exile right now. So, the Jews or Israelites comprise an overwhelming majority and this is another interesting fact, in Nobel Prize winners, in medical, scientific, business, many other trades around the world. Both the Christians and Muslims have a much bigger population, but the history of both reveal that much of their growth, Christians and Islam both, were through forced conversions and violent rulership. because of that, the numbers of Israelites may be substantially higher, and this is something I deal with in the Noahide class, may be substantially higher than anyone but God knows. So that's another interesting fact. But again, those numbers of 2 billion for Christianity and Islam, remember that those were, in many cases, began as forced conversions. And those conversions, in many cases, survived and over time became assimilated into the beliefs. But again, that's something that only once in Israel's history has proselytism ever been a part of it, and it was a very bad situation. Well, I'm not going to talk about that here, but at any rate, so I believe, and this is the bottom line, I believe that the purpose of the preservation of Israel is the purpose of the preservation of the Hebrew language, as well as the Hebrew laws and teachings, including the hope of a Messiah. So all of this to say, arguably, the concept of Messiah began among the Jews, so the roots and truth of the subject should be found there more so than in any other religion who at best chose to copy the idea. All right? And again, they've survived. They brought those beliefs with them. How did they survive? Only through God. I mean, there's no other answer. There's no other answer. Again, if you believe that there's a God, there's no other answer. That Israel is still God's chosen for a particular purpose. That doesn't mean they're any more special than anyone else, but that we have a purpose. And we'll talk about that in other places. But at any rate, I want to close this part by as you look at this map and all of these empires that are gone, this is something that Mark Twain said in 1897. I love this quote. I've used it several times. I'll use it again. Here it says, Mark Twain, quote, "If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 0.25% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also very out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and Romans followed and made a vast noise, and they were gone. Other people have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now and have vanished. The Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?" Unquote. And of course, as I say, the secret of his immortality is that Israel carries with it a very important message, a message from God to the world. And that message, in part, is the hope of the Messiah. There are two ways that we can look at who the Messiah is. And both of them are interesting. I've chosen one, but the one is chronological. And that's to take us through history and see how the Messianic idea developed. They're both interesting. Chronological approach certainly has its benefits, but it takes a little more time and probably not enough time for looking at both of them. So I've chosen to focus on the ideological approach in order to present the ideas to you as they're known today according to the Rabbinic commentaries. So first, again, the ideas from the rabbis. If you're going to listen to that, I first want to try and establish, and I know it won't work for everyone in this brief time we have, but I want to first try to establish the credentials of the Jewish rabbis. Why should we listen to old dead Jewish guys? And take a look at that, because much of the modern understanding of the Messianic idea is rabbinic. And by rabbinic, I'm referring to the Talmud and the rabbis of history, again from the 2nd century on. So why do we care about what they have to say? So why trust the rabbis? First of all, because God commands us to, very clearly in Torah. Even Jesus, for those of you that believe in him, even Jesus acknowledged this when he said in Matthew 23, quote, "Then Jesus spoke to the crowd and to his disciples, saying, 'The scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so practice and observe everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach.'" Unquote. So here's where we can find, where Jesus found, and we can find this commandment. Why would he say that they sit in Moses' seat? What does that mean? So we find that in several places. Primarily, we're going to look at Deuteronomy 17:9, but let's take a look at a few other places. Exodus 18 is the story of Jethro. Jethro sees Moses involved in all kinds of arbitrations and disputes and taking up all of his time, and he suggests to Moses that he delegate. In Deuteronomy 1, chapter 1, verses 9 through 18, that is repeated, where Moses says, yes, I took Jethro's advice after consulting God, and God said, yes, it's a great idea. So that's repeated. That section of Exodus is repeated in Deuteronomy. Plus, then, the addition there in Deuteronomy is choosing of judges by the people. So in Deuteronomy 16:18, we have again that choosing repeated, but this time as a command from God. It says, "Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee throughout thy tribes." So there's a command. Make judges and officers. What does that mean? So this was to apply after they arrived in the land of Israel. It should be noted that there's a change here made from what had been previously done. The judges were to be tied to the city and no longer to the number of people, because originally it was judges of tens, judges of hundreds, judges of 1,000. So now that's changed to judges in the cities. There's also no mention of a hierarchy of courts. Now, Moshe would no longer be there as the final authority. The final authority was therefore transferred to, if you will, the people's courts. So now in Deuteronomy 17, 8 through 13, we have the following, and this is really the heart of it. If a case is too baffling for you to decide, be it a controversy over homicide, civil law, or assault, matters of dispute in your courts, you shall promptly repair to the place that your God, and here we use the tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name, will have chosen, and appear before the Levitical priests or the magistrate in charge at the time. 3 important words there. And present your problem. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced to you from that place, that Hashem, that God chose, observing scrupulously all their instructions to you. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left. Should either party to the dispute act presumptuously and disregard the priest charged with serving there your God, or the magistrate, that party shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid, and will not act presumptuously again. This was the establishment of the Sanhedrin, what became the Sanhedrin, the 73 in charge of the Sanhedrin, originally the 70, with Moses being 71. This is where it came from. This is the command. And again, it's recognized in Christianity as well as in Judaism that these people in the Sanhedrin had that authority. Now, the question becomes, and we'll look at this in a little bit, but the question from there is, okay, that's the Sanhedrin, but the Sanhedrin is no longer in existence. So what about today? But then we go back to the idea of at the time. And the question is, did God know that there would be a time without the Sanhedrin? So what was he referring to? And the logical answer, and the answer that the rabbis have come up with, is that yes, there is a group of people that took over from the Sanhedrin, and those were the rebbes, the rabbis, the leaders of community. Not just any rabbi, but the rebbes, the ones who were in leadership positions, the ones who are acknowledged leaders. They do have that same authority today, while the Sanhedrin no longer exists. Again, the argument against it is, well, that's not what the verse says, but it does say at the time. And again, we have to believe, I have to believe, that God knew what the future held, and would not have made that pronouncement if he did not know that there would be a time without the Sanhedrin. At any rate, but even without that, even if we just say that the Sanhedrin has that authority, then the majority of what we're going to look at in terms of the Messiah actually comes from the teachings of the Sanhedrin, and those are recorded in the Talmud. So that kind of goes against that. So there's no the Sanhedrin itself didn't disband until late in the 3rd, 4th century, and it was still, and that's where the Talmud came from, are the writings and teachings of the rabbis of the Sanhedrin and famous and important rabbis at the time. So, again, to summarize, the biblical evidence to this point. Judges are chosen by Israel to make legal decisions, and those legal decisions include the law. They include giving us details about the law that aren't contained in the Torah. That's called the oral law, and they have the authority to do that. They make decisions on any type of question asked. Their authority can be creative, and what they decree becomes God's law, and that's Torah. That's commandment, right? So let's look at some other, perhaps more logical, we might consider logical reasons that the voice of the rabbis is important. And one analogy that becomes very clear to me, and we can substitute any professional position here, but let's just take a look at a surgeon. Why would you trust a surgeon to operate and perform open heart surgery? If you have a need for open heart surgery, and you want to find a physician who can do that successfully, I mean, you wouldn't go to your brother and ask him to read the textbooks and quickly learn how to do open heart surgery so he can do it for you. You just wouldn't do that. You go to someone who has the training, who has spent time training, and has a successful practice in that training. So you want to look for someone who has been trained and has been successful, and that's if we look at, and we're going to look at that here in just a minute, in terms of how does a rabbi train, we begin to understand that the reason we believe the rabbis is that they do spend the important time of training and understanding elements of things that you and I just don't know, just don't have that training and that ability to know. Again, just as we don't know how to be a surgeon, we also don't know how to be a rabbi in the truest sense of the word. Or another thing to look at is why would you trust a Supreme Court to establish laws? Why do we care what the Supreme Court has to say? And yet we do. And the reason we do, again, politics aside, and certainly that's an important consideration nowadays. But at the heart of the Supreme Court are judges who have spent their lives, their working lives at any rate, learning about the ins and outs of the Constitution, of constitutional law. So we trust them because they are authorities. And why are they authorities? Because they've spent time studying, spent time that you and I have not had, poring over law books and learning all of the things that have come before that they can draw on to make a new law or to make a new understanding of a law. Okay? So, let's look at the training of a rabbi. Okay? First of all, many cases in all Jewish men, Jewish boys, but especially those whose parents or who looks like they're going to go into the training of becoming a rabbi, actually begin learning Torah and Hebrew from the age of 3. At 3 years old, Jewish boys are required to begin learning Hebrew and begin learning very basic Torah and what's going on there. From that point on, from the age of 3 on, then they develop a greater understanding of Hebrew. They begin to study the prophets, the rabbis. They do many other studies. The Talmud comes in, and over the next 15 or so years, by the time they're in their teens, they now have a complete command of Hebrew, and in many cases, a very deep understanding of all aspects of Jewish writings. And in most cases, well, in all cases actually, they've studied under a line of rabbis. And a Rebbe especially can tell you who their Rebbe was and who their Rebbe was and who their Rebbe was. And through a book called Pirkei Avot, in many cases, they can actually go back to Moses and authority, in authority. So again, these are the understandings of what it takes to be a Rebbe, which is just a little higher up, if you will, than a rabbi. But most rabbis have the same ability. Generally, these rabbis who spend, again, their entire lives, not from the age of 3 on, learning, many of them have an encyclopedic knowledge not only of Torah and Talmud, but also of the nuances of Hebrew, Aramaic, and the two most important languages that are needed to understand what the Torah is saying. Without the knowledge of Hebrew, and as I teach the Hebrew classes, I talk about this. Without the knowledge of Hebrew, it is impossible. And I say this certainly. It doesn't mean it's fruitless. It doesn't mean you shouldn't study, but it's impossible to truly study Torah, to truly study any part of the Tanach, because Hebrew, as a language itself, is so beautiful, but also so intricate and so deep that you can learn, as the Talmud says, that there are 70 different faces of the Torah. There are 70 different ways to interpret every single word, not only every single word, but every single letter. Those are the criteria of someone that we want to make decisions regarding the law. Okay? They need to understand gematria, letter by letter, letter location, other words with the same letters or the same number, comparison to other places in the word that is, other places that word is used in the Tanakh, understanding the Hebrew thought processes. All of that is an important reason why we can trust the rabbis who have gone through all of this. It doesn't mean every heart surgeon is perfect, is skilled as another. Some are more skilled than others. In that case, you want to look for the history of their practice, I guess. And it's the same thing with rabbis. Not every rabbi is going to have this depth and of learning and of processing. But the Rebbes, for the most part, the ones who are in leadership in the rabbinic world, are generally all in this category. So Again, my argument being, why believe the rabbis? Because they have been trained and they have practiced for years the dissemination and understanding of Torah and of the teachings of the law, and one of those teachings is regarding who the Messiah is and who the Messiah isn't. So I want to go now to complete our introduction and talk about the words of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, who lived in the 13th century, first in Spain and then in Egypt. His writings are considered foundational for all Jewish belief in the Messiah. You can go to sefaria.org and pull this information up yourself if you want to read it along with me on your own or at a later time. You're looking for, here's one way to get there. You can type Mishneh Torah in the search bar at sefaria.org. Make sure you spell it E-H, Mishneh Torah. And then you want to choose the icon that has the 4 boxes in it. You can then scroll to the very end of the list on the Mishneh Torah, which is called Kings and Wars, and then you'll go to chapter 11. And I'll put this link as well in the description section for you to take a look at. But what I'm going to do here is essentially read through chapters 11 and 12, portions of it to you. We're not going to spend a lot of time discussing. I say that, and then I may, but I don't think we'll spend a lot of time discussing. But in subsequent classes, we'll come back to some of these things. But again, as I mentioned before, if you have a question or comment about any of this, please put it in the comment section, and I or someone will make a comment on it and get back to you on that. So that's important, and I know that there may be questions, and that's okay. So again, please bear with me as we essentially read for the rest of the class here this section, chapters 11 and 12 of the Mishneh Torah, with some comment, but very limited. So here we have Maimonides Mishneh Torah, chapters 11 and 12, and the laws of kingship. We'll take a look at, first of all, the first 3 verses in that. Verse 1 says, "In the future, the Messianic king will arise and renew the Davidic dynasty, restoring to its initial sovereignty. He will build the temple, gather the dispersed of Israel. Then in his days the observance of all the statutes will return to their previous state. We will offer sacrifices, observe the sabbatical and jubilee years, according to all their particulars as described by the Torah. Anyone who does not believe in him or does not await his coming denies not only the statements of the other prophets, but those of the Torah and Moses, our teacher. The Torah testified to his coming, as Deuteronomy 30, 3-5 states. God will bring back your captivity and have mercy upon you. He will again gather you from among the nations. Even if your diaspora is at the ends of the heavens, God will gather you up from there and bring you to the land. These explicit words of the Torah include all the statements made by all the prophets. Reference to Mashiach is also made in the portion of Bilam, who prophesies about 2 anointed kings, the first anointed king, David, who saved Israel from her oppressors, and the final anointed king, who will arise from his descendants and save Israel in the end of days. That passage is in Numbers 24, 17-18, relates, quote, "I see it, but not now." This refers to David. "I perceive it, but not in the near future." This refers to the Messianic king. "A star shall go forth from Jacob." This refers to David. "And a staff shall arise in Israel." This refers to the Messianic king. "Crushing all of Moab's princes." This refers to David, as 2 Samuel 8:2 relates. He smote Moab and measured them with a line, decimating all of Seth's descendants. This refers to the Messianic king, about whom Zechariah 9:10 says, "He will rule from sea to sea. Edom will be demolished." Let's go back. Edom will be demolished. This refers to David. As 2 Samuel 8:6 states, Edom became the servants of David. Seir will be destroyed. This refers to the Messianic king, as Obadiah 1:21 prophesies. Saviors will ascend to Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau. Verse 2. Similarly, with regard to the cities of refuge, Deuteronomy 19:8-9 states, when God will expand your borders, you must add 3 more cities. This command was never fulfilled. Surely, God did not give this command in vain. There is no need to cite proofs from the works of the prophets, for all their books are filled with mention of this matter. And just the point being that since there's a third city of refuge that hasn't been designated, and that's because Israel is not the size that it's supposed to be, that this is proof that there will be a time, an age that will come that will allow us to add that third city of refuge. So that's his point there. Verse 3, one should not presume that the Messianic king must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomenon in the world, resurrect the dead, or perform other similar deeds. This is definitely not true. Proof can be brought from the fact that Rabbi Akiva, one of the greater sages of the Mishnah, was one of the supporters of King Bar Kokhba, and would describe him as the Messianic king. He and all the sages of his generation considered him to be the Messianic king until he was killed because of his sins. Once he was killed, they realized that he was not the Mashiach. The sages did not ask him for any signs or wonders. The main thrust of the matter is, this Torah, its statutes, and its laws are everlasting. We may not add to them or detract from them. So again, his point here is that miracles aren't necessary for the Messiah to prove that this is the Messiah. And there are other sources, rabbinic sources, that do say that the Messiah will do miracles. But again, Maimonides' point here is that they're not necessary for that proof. And verse 4, chapter 11, really kind of sums everything up in terms of the Messiah here. And I have one other point I want to make before we get into the script itself. And I don't know that we've talked about this, but the whole point of the Mishneh Torah that Maimonides wrote is that he took the entire Talmud, huge, copious amounts of information, and he distilled them into their essence, into a readable, a size that could be grasped by most people. Whereas going through the Talmud is really a job for lawyers or rabbis. But Maimonides wrote the Mishneh Torah in a way that would be easy then for everyone to see. You can't find a law in the Talmud where it covers it in its entirety. Throughout the Talmud are discussions about that law, and you have to know where everything is. What Maimonides did is he took all of the things related to that law and he put them now in one place. And he only took the things that were the most important. Another problem with the Talmud is you have rabbis saying, I think this is true, I think that's true, I think this is true. You have 3 rabbis, you have 4 opinions. Maimonides took only the most recognized and followed opinions, and that's what he put in. So that's why his discussion of the Messiah is so crucial to our understanding, because otherwise we'd have to dig through the thousands and thousands and thousands of lines in the Talmud to find this information. So I did want to point that out. That's the beauty of the Mishneh Torah. Maimonides was one of those rebbes that we talked about that spent his whole life. That he was an incredible genius, and it shows through the Mishneh Torah. Not everyone agrees with everything he says, and even regarding the Messiah, but there's no question that this is what he compiled and put together. So it's very important to at least have an understanding from this point. All right, so again, in chapter 11, verse 4, he discusses then the elements needed to be the Messiah. So here's what he says. If a king will arise from the house of David, who diligently contemplates the Torah and demonstrates righteousness beyond others, observes its mitzvot as prescribed by the written law and the oral law, as David his ancestor. So he has to demonstrate that righteousness. As he will compel all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah and rectify the breaches in its observance. So here he is a teacher of righteousness. And fight the wars of God. So he's a warrior, spiritually and physically. We may with assurance consider him Mashiach. Plus, if he succeeds in the above, and then builds the temple in its place, and gathers all of Israel together, gathers all of the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely the Mashiach. He will then improve the entire world, motivating all the nations to serve God together. As Zephaniah 3:9 states, quote, I will transform the peoples to a purer language that they all will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. So again, these are the elements. These four things. Is he a Torah scholar? Is he a king? Does he demonstrate righteousness? Does he teach righteousness? Is he a warrior? Does he win battles? Now, these could be spiritual or physical or both. Okay, those four things are wonderful. They're very nice. It's good. We should see this in the Messiah. But this doesn't make him the Messiah. And this is why in Christianity we have a second coming. This is what makes him the Messiah. Okay, that he builds the third temple and that he gathers all of Israel together. And that is all of the hidden Jews. That's not just the 15 million that we know about today. There are many more, and only the Messiah can bring those together, and only the Messiah will know what tribes each one is from, because that's important too. Where do they go in the land of Israel? By tribe. That will be the same thing in the Messianic age as it was in the past. So this is the importance to recognize that there are final proofs for the Messiah. And Christianity understood this, or there wouldn't be a need for a second coming. There wouldn't be discussion necessarily of a second coming, because Christianity recognized that, yes, their Messiah did not do everything that the Messiah was supposed to do. So there's a second coming. But anyway, this is what Maimonides has to say. Continuing on in verse 5, how can we know a false Messiah if he did not succeed to this degree or was killed? He surely is not the Redeemer promised by the Torah. Rather, he should be considered as all the other proper and complete kings of the Davidic dynasty who died. God caused him to arise only to test the many, as Daniel 11:35 states, quote, and some of the wise men will stumble, to try them, to refine, to clarify, until the appointed time, because the set time is in the future, unquote. Verse 6, and here he deals specifically with Jesus. He says, for example, Jesus of Nazareth, who aspired to be the Mashiach and was executed by the court, was also alluded to in Daniel's prophecies, as 11:14 states, the vulgar among your people shall exalt themselves in an attempt to fulfill the vision, but they shall stumble, unquote. Can there be a greater stumbling block than Christianity? All the prophets spoke of Mashiach as the Redeemer of Israel and their Savior, who would gather their dispersed and strengthen their observance in the mitzvot. In contrast, Christianity caused the Jews to be slain by the sword, their remnants to be scattered and humbled, the Torah to be altered, and the majority of the world to err and serve a God other than the Lord. Okay, so harsh words. Remember, he was writing this in the 13th century. A lot of things were going on there that were not good. A lot of pogroms, a lot of persecutions by both Muslims, but primarily by Christians at this time. So he had those things to say. But now let's read in verse 7, because he's going to have some. He's going to soften that just a little bit. And verse 7 says, but Jesus did accomplish a great thing. Nevertheless, the intent of the Creator of the world is not within the power of man to comprehend. For his ways are not our ways, nor are his thoughts our thoughts. Ultimately, All of the deeds of Jesus of Nazareth and that Ishmaelite, Muhammad, who arose after him, will only serve to prepare the way for Mashiach's coming and the improvement of the entire world, motivating the nations to serve God together. As Zephaniah 3:9 states, I will transform the peoples to a pure language, that they all will call upon the name of God and serve him with one purpose. Verse 8 says, right now there are many truths. How will this come about? The entire world has already become filled with the mention of Mashiach, Torah, and mitzvot. These matters have been spread to the furthermost islands, to many stubborn-hearted nations. They discuss these matters and the mitzvot of the Torah, saying these mitzvot were true, but were already negated in the present age and are not applicable for all time. Islam. Others say implied in the mitzvot are hidden concepts that cannot be understood simply. The Mashiach has already come and revealed those hidden truths. Christianity says that. In verse 9 he goes on with Messiah, only one truth. When the true Messianic king will arise and prove successful, his position becoming exalted and uplifted, they will all return and realize that their ancestors endowed them with a false heritage, and their prophets and ancestors caused them to err. So his point here is, yes, Christianity did an amazing thing, and so did Islam. They are essentially the ones that brought the world, not Judaism, but Christianity and Islam, that brought the world to a state of virtually being monotheistic. They spread that knowledge and that information, and that was God doing that. And so Maimonides acknowledges those things. But he says that going from there, there's still many truths. Jesus and Muhammad, Christianity and Islam don't agree. So there are many truths. The Messiah has to bring all of those truths together so that there's only one truth. And that's why we know the Messiah hasn't come, and that the Messiah has yet to come and will do those things. And concluding now, Maimonides now takes a look at the Messianic age. What is to be expected when the Messiah is here? And here's what he has to say. The Messianic age will look very much like the world does now. Although Isaiah 11:6 states, the wolf will dwell with the lamb and the leopard will lie down with the young goat, these words are a metaphor and a parable. The interpretation of the prophecy is as follows. Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked Gentiles, who are likened to a wolf and a leopard, as in the prophecy Jeremiah 5:6, a wolf from the wilderness shall spoil them, and a leopard will stalk their cities. They will all return to the true faith and no longer steal or destroy. Rather, they will eat permitted food at peace with Israel, as Isaiah 11:7 states. The lion will eat straw like an ox. Similarly, other messianic prophecies of this nature are metaphors. In the messianic era, everyone will realize which matters were implied by these metaphors and which allusions they contained. Verse 2 says, the war of Gog and Magog will take place at the beginning of the Messianic age. Before the war of Gog and Magog, a prophet will arise to inspire Israel to be upright and prepare their hearts. As Malachi 3:22 states, behold, I am sending you Elijah. There are other opinions regarding this. We'll know when it happens. These are not essential matters of faith. Similarly, one should not try to determine the appointed time for Mashiach's coming. Verse 3. Once Messiah is established as king, he will also teach us truths, especially regarding who belongs to what tribe. He will purify the lineage of the Levites, first stating he is a prophet of defined lineage. He is a Levite of defined lineage. When he defines the lineage of the Israelites, he will make known their tribal lineage alone, stating he is from this tribe and he is from another tribe. He will not, by contrast, state concerning a person who is presumed to be of unblemished lineage, he is illegitimate or he is of a slave lineage. For the law is, once a family has become intermingled with the entire Jewish people, they may remain intermingled. Verse 4. The sages and the prophets did not yearn for the Messianic era in order to have dominion over the entire world, to rule over the Gentiles, to be exalted by the nations, or to eat, drink, and celebrate. Rather, they desired to be free to involve themselves in Torah and wisdom without any pressures or disturbances, so that they would merit the world to come, as explained in Hilkot Teshuvah. And then verse 5 says, in that era, There will be neither famine or war, envy or competition, for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. Therefore the Jews will be great sages and know the hidden matters, grasping the knowledge of their Creator according to the full extent of human potential, as Isaiah 11:9 says, quote, "The world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed." So that's a look at Maimonides, and the only other thing to point out here to talk about is the Messianic age will look very much like the world does now. This is an area that there is a lot of discussion about. Many rabbis believe that it will not look very much like the world does now. But again, those are, as Maimonides points out, those are things that are minor. Who cares? We'll find out the truth when the Messiah gets here. In the meanwhile, let's focus on the main aspects and points of who the Messiah is and how to bring the Messiah here. And that's really something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spent a lot of time talking about, and we'll look at that a little bit more in detail further on. So in our next class, we'll take a look at more details about who the Messiah will be and what will be his mission. So join us for that. Thanks for spending your time with me here on this presentation of the Messiah, and we'll continue this as Hashem allows us to do so. Meanwhile, thank you for sharing your time with me, and thank you for watching and viewing here on Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Averna. Shalom.